All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to our event in the Bytes and Insights series. Today we are doing a super exciting featured book session. Build a Career in Data Science is the book that we're going to be discussing today. We have the authors on this meeting as well, Emily Robinson and Jacqueline Nolis, who are both going to be discussing basically their favorite parts of the book. We highly encourage everybody to ask questions throughout the entire event. So we're going to be looking at those questions and noting them down. We will have a Q&A session at the end. Awesome, so let's get started. So Bytes and Insights, just a quick overview. This is a series that Women in Analytics hosts every 2 weeks on Wednesday at noon Eastern. So be on the lookout for future events. We do record all of these events and post them on our website. So if you want to check out any of our previous events, feel free to do that. And again, we have some upcoming events you can attend as well. A little bit about Women in Analytics. So the mission of Women in Analytics is to increase visibility to women making an impact in the analytics space. And we host conversations around advancements of analytical research, development, and applications. We also just launched a new membership platform. So feel free to check us out on our website, womeninanalytics.com, if you want to learn more about that membership platform and other things that we're doing as well. Nidhi, I'll let you kind of intro WITI as well. WITI is our partnered organization for this event.
Hi everyone, I'm Nidhi Alapuram. I'm one of the leaders on WITI. I'll talk a little bit about WITI. WITI, which is Women in Technology International, is committed to empowering innovators, inspiring future generations, and building inclusive cultures. WITI is redefining the way men and women collaborate to drive innovation, grow business, while helping community partners create and foster gender inclusiveness or a gender inclusive culture. As leaders of Columbus WITI network, we provide a local platform for personal and professional connections, resources, and opportunities to help others celebrate the role that technology plays in their career, business, and life. As mentioned earlier, our mission is to empower innovators, inspire future generations, and build inclusive cultures. And our goals are definitely to become a gold standard for gender inclusivity, make men part of our solution, and empower men and women to bring the best of both. This is our first event collaborating with WIA, and I'm super excited about our partnership and this event.
Awesome, thank you so much, Nidhi. Just a quick overview of the agenda. We just did some intros of the organizations hosting the event today. We'll dive into a half an hour of a discussion with the authors of the book, and then we'll have about 20 minutes to do Q&A with the audience. So as you're listening to them talk about the book, feel free to, as I mentioned, chat with us and send in the Q&A. If you click Q&A, there's a specific button that you can click for that. You can enter your questions in there. We will be monitoring it the whole time and make sure that we'll get to your questions towards the end of the discussion. And then we'll have some closing remarks and tell you how to access this webinar recording if you missed any of it. Just some quick tips. You can put the display in side-by-side mode if we are displaying slides so that you can see the presenters as well. If you're having audio issues, please use the chat, or you can email us at info@womeninanalytics.com. We will be monitoring that. Again, if you have questions, please ask, and keep your eye out for a poll that we're going to ask the audience. So just want to do a quick intro of the speakers today. We have one of the authors, Emily Robinson, who's a senior data scientist at Warby Parker, where she works on a centralized team tackling some of the company's biggest projects. Previously, she worked at DataCamp, where she built and ran their experimentation and analytics system, and at Etsy, where she worked with their search team to design, implement, and analyze experiments. She regularly gives talks on A/B testing, R programming, and data science careers at conferences and meetups across the country and internationally. Welcome, Emily. The other author of the book is Jacqueline Nolis, and she is the principal data scientist at Brightloom, where she creates models to help restaurants and retailers improve the customer experience. She has a PhD in industrial engineering and has over a decade of experience with helping companies use data, ranking from DSW to Airbnb. For fun, Jacqueline likes to use data science for humor, like using deep for humor, like using deep learning to generate offensive license plates, which is hilarious. Thanks for including that. For our Q&A moderator, you all just met Nidhi. She is the DevOps platform leader at Nationwide Insurance, and empowers associates to implement DevOps tools and practices. Previously, she provided strategic and operational leadership to the NFIT CIO application product owner role, managing customer-facing applications and commission and compensation systems. Prior to that, she was a technical lead and has 12 years of hands-on programming experience. Nidhi holds a bachelor in computer science and engineering from Gulbarga University, apologies if I butchered that, and a master's in computer science from Franklin University. She serves on the board of directors for Inspiration, Nationwide Associate Resource Group. Welcome, Nidhi, and thank you so much for participating today. Real quick, before we jump into the discussion, I'm gonna go ahead and launch the poll. So the poll today that you're about to answer is basically, we're trying to understand why you joined us for this discussion today. So there's 4 different options. It's a multiple select. So the first would be to learn how to advance my career as a data scientist, to learn more about this data science role, considering becoming a data scientist, or to better support my team of data scientists. So I'll just wait just a second so we can get some answers in from the audience. And we have almost everyone who's answered so far, so thank you for participating. I think this will really help both the authors kind of tailor their discussion to based off of the audience intention. And a few more seconds for last minute answers if you're thinking about it. All right, I'll end the poll and share the results with you. So it looks like we have about 60% of our attendees wanted to learn more about the data science role or are considering becoming a data scientist. A few people on here trying to better support their team of data scientists, and 33% trying to advance their career as a data scientist. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing those results. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass things off to Emily and Jacqueline for the discussion portion of today's event.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction. So yes, I'm Jacqueline Nolis, and with me is Emily Robinson. And
hi, folks.
So we, in the last year, wrote a book, Build a Career in Data Science. And so this book, the intent of the book was to go from before you even become before you're a data scientist, when you're just thinking about it, like give career advice from there all the way to you're a data scientist when you become like a senior data scientist and a manager and a part of a community. So this book covers that whole process, from interviews to resumes to what do you do on the first month of your job, like that whole process. And so if you are thinking about becoming a data scientist or are looking to become more senior as a data scientist, definitely check out the book if you haven't already. And if you haven't yet, the URL, and so Emily and I have a lot of fun with this, the URL for the book is bestbook.cool. It's http://bestbook.cool. And if you go there, there's a discount code you can use if you want to get it today, which is MTP Data20. And that gets you like 40% off, which is like that's a nice deal. And so for today, what Emily and I are going to do is we're going to, we have 3 of our favorite parts of the book that we wanted to talk about. And so Emily has 2 and I have 1. And so we're going to just talk about it. And the thing about when you write a book like this, you really like, when you write a book, it has to be like very like omnipotent. What's the word? Like it has to be very like stepping back and looking from high above. Like you can't really put like your own personal like experience in so much. You have to talk about like, this is the way you should grow your career. And so the nice thing about us talking about these different parts of our books is, it allows us to talk a little bit more about our own personal experiences. So like for me, this is a lot of fun because I can talk a little bit about what went into the thinking behind parts of the book. What was the link to use that discount code? The link is bestbook.cool. God, I just love saying that. We also have a link that is datascicareer.com that we use in professional settings, but like we're all having fun here. So anyway, with that said, Emily, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so I'm going to read an excerpt from chapter 3 of the book. So this is the chapter on getting the skills to become a data scientist. And part of the reason I chose this excerpt was because the way I'm going to talk about is one that I think is often overlooked by people. So when you think about becoming a data scientist, people often think of like, oh, I could get a master's degree, or maybe I do a boot camp, or I do lots of online courses. And we talk about all three of those options, but there's a fourth option, which is getting data science work within your company. And so I just wanted to read an excerpt about that. So getting data science work within your company. You may find yourself in a data science adjacent job. An unusual but often very effective method of learning data science is to start doing more and more data science work as part of your current job. Maybe you're a business person who adds a business spin to data science reports and could start adding your own graphs. Or maybe you work in finance, making spreadsheets that you can move into R or Python. Consider a hypothetical Amber, a person who has been working for several years in the market research department, running surveys on customers and using a market research graphical user interface to aggregate the survey results. Amber has a background in sociology and did a small amount of programming during their undergraduate years. They frequently work with the data science department, passing along survey data and helping the data scientists understand it so they can use it in their models. Over time, Amber starts doing a bit of work for the data science team. A bit of feature extraction in R here, a bit of creating visualizations there. Soon, the data science team is relying more and more on Amber. During this time, they're really improving the team members' programming and data science skills. After a year, they join the data science team full-time, leaving market research behind. Trying to do some data science at your current job is a great method because it's low risk and has some built-in motivation. You aren't trying to do an expensive bootcamp or degree program that you have to quit your job for. You're just trying to add a little data science work where you can. And the fact that you're doing data science in your own job is motivating because the work you'll do is valuable to others. Over time, you can do more data science work until eventually it's all you do, as opposed to taking an educational program and suddenly switching jobs. So there's more in this section than that, but I wanted to just give that little intro and then start a discussion. So Jacqueline, what do you think about this method?
I have so many thoughts on this. So many thoughts, because I think for me personally, like I kind of went in straight away from school as like a data scientist. Like it wasn't called a data scientist at the time, but I had that role. But the thing that I think most of what I've learned as a data scientist has been doing this still as a data scientist, right? Like, oh, my company, like we have this problem. Oh, I can feel like it might need to use some statistical quality control style data science or like anomaly detection. I've never done that before. I'm just going to try and wing it anyway and see how far I can go. And so and I've seen it work. So it worked for me as a data scientist, and I've seen it work for people who are not data scientists who just like came up to me or came up to people on my team being like, hey, I've been trying to do this thing. Can you give me like can I try taking your data science data and doing a little analysis myself? And like, generally people love helping other people in companies. So if you find an opportunity where you're not a data scientist, but you're maybe data science adjacent, like an analyst or something, and you find an opportunity where you have the potential to do some work, even if it turns out that the work you do isn't like at exactly the quality standard that they're going to need to actually use it, just getting the experience to try it and the feedback and learning, well, what did you miss? Like that whole learning feedback loop is immensely, immensely valuable.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't necessarily have to be a project for the data science team. Like at Warby, we use Looker, and one of our data science team members is leading Looker trainings. And so I think that's a really great way for folks to get started. Like if you have something, just like starting to work more with data, if you're in spreadsheets, going to something else, because that can make your boss really excited too, right? Because if they've been having a problem and you're like, hey, actually, I was able to figure out the solution, or is able to make this dashboard, and so we don't have to do this old way, or you thought we couldn't do this at all. That's a really great way to, be advancing your skills while also, advancing within your current job as well.
Yeah, and this doesn't always work. Like if you're like, I'm gonna pick a random career here. If you're like a car salesperson, it may be the case that there's just nothing around that you could possibly use data science on, but maybe you do have monthly car sales that you wanna try putting into Python and seeing if you can make a chart out of that. Like having that curiosity on something related to your work often makes things way easier to stay motivated than trying to do it on like a Kaggle data set that you really have no personal connection to.
Yeah, I mean, that's similar. So the following chapter to this is making a data science portfolio of projects. And one thing we recommend there is picking something that you're interested in. And there often we're talking about, like finding, data sets, looking at like Reddit or Yelp or who knows what. But, you could find data in your own job. And even if it's not something you turn into your you give to your boss, you could still analyze that data, right? You have the background information, and it's possible you're not able to share it, right? It could be confidential information, but you could build those skills by looking at data that you're interested in at your company.
Yeah, and you have like should be some mentor or person who knows about the data. Like there's some like personal people you can connect to in a way you can't from generic data set on the internet.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is, like you said, Jacqueline, this is not necessarily like something everyone can do. It depends also like, is there a data science team at your company? Maybe there's not, or maybe they're like totally overworked. We also talk about like how to build a good relationship with them and sort of like some conversation perspectives. But I do think, like you were saying, Jacqueline, I mean, this is how also data scientists learn as well, learning on the job. So, maybe you do this in parallel to taking some online courses, right? You take some online courses, you try to apply it to your work, or, you decide like, well, I learned some stuff on the job, but to the next level, I really do need to do that master's or boot camp. But this is also a good way to start getting a feel. Am I going to like this work before you pay tens of thousands of dollars for an educational program?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a little bit of a skill to like be like not pushy if you have coworkers who are helping you, like being thoughtful about your mentor, use of mentors. But like it's a skill you can learn, and like it's something you build up. And yes, absolutely, it's much cheaper than spending 2 years in a master's program and then realizing you don't want to be a data scientist.
Yeah. All right, Jacqueline, do you want to read your
Yeah,
excerpt?
so this is exciting for me because this is the first time I read the book on the Kindle. So I pulled it up on my Kindle, so I'm really excited. It feels very future-y. And it's because I recently moved, and somewhere in my house are the physical copies of the book, and I don't know where they went. So, okay, so my selection is from the chapter on failure. So we have a whole chapter in a book just devoted to what do you do when your data science projects fail, and thinking about failure and processing failure, because this is something that's really important to your career and happens constantly, and people just don't talk about that much, and that's like a real problem. So, so this segment comes from the end of the chapter. It's kind of like a little bit of a wrapping it up. So I'll read it and then I'll talk about it. Then we can talk about it. That's how these things work. Okay, so we'll end this chapter with a metaphor for data science. It's common for aspiring and junior data scientists to think of a professional data scientist as like an architect of buildings. A novice architect might have designed simple homes, and an experienced architect can build skyscrapers. But if either of them have a building collapse, then it's career-ending failure. So similarly, one way to view a data scientist is they build more and more complex models as they get more senior, but if one fails, then their career is jeopardized. And so after you've read this chapter, we hope that you recognize that this isn't actually an accurate model of what data science is. A better metaphor is that a data scientist is like a treasure hunter. A treasure hunter sets out, they look for lost valuables, and if they're lucky, a treasure hunter will find some. So a novice treasure hunter may look for, like standard things in nearby islands, but experienced treasure hunter hunts the most legendary treasure. A data scientist is much more like a treasure hunter. They seek out successful models, and once in a while, their models and analyses work. Although a senior data scientist may work on more complicated or tricky projects, everyone is continuously failing, and that's just part of the job. So which is to say, I personally struggled with this a ton early in my career. I was working on models, and then a model wouldn't work out. And I feel so distraught. I did this feeling of like, if I were a better data scientist, this model would have worked. I really beat myself up over it. And then now, many years in therapy, many years of being a data scientist and therapy later, it's like, it's not the case that being a better data scientist means your models are going to succeed when they would have failed as a junior one. What it really means is that most of the time with data science projects, the signal isn't actually there in the data that you'd hope for, right? Like maybe the customer data doesn't actually let you predict churn because there's just nothing that the customers do that will let you know in advance when they're going to leave or not. And a senior data scientist isn't going to, not going to have that problem. Everyone's going to have that problem. And so if you really beat yourself up over having these things happen, it's dangerous to your mental psyche to like really put that burden on yourself.
Yeah. But I want to talk about that because when you were writing this chapter, you had put in data science failures are inevitable, kind of like you said. And it actually prompted me to reflect on my own career. And I was like, I don't think I've had that many failures. But that wasn't like, I'm like, I pat myself on the back. That means I'm such an excellent data scientist. It means I really haven't been taking that many risks. And I do think that's something important to think about is how do you kind of balance the, like, because there are some projects that are more risky, right? Like you said, there's some like prediction, trying to do a prediction problem. There might not be a signal, but something that's more of an analytics problem, right? You may or making a dashboard or, making some graphs. If you know the data is available, that's not a very risky project. And so I think it's worthwhile thinking about, okay, what kind of projects am I taking on? Both some are inherently risky, and also am I taking on enough stuff that pushes my skills too, right? That helps me learn more.
Yeah, and I think you and I are two examples of different successful data science careers. Whereas I think I was very much the mad science data scientist. Like, what if we took the customer data and made a churn model, blah, 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 which 75% of the projects I've worked on have just totally gone bust, which gets you and that's one way. Or you could do hey, I'm going to take on the more the work that is important and valuable, but maybe less risky and theoretical. And I think that I think those are both different valid types of data science work. And the rate at which you fail isn't necessarily, yes, again, it's not a relationship to how skilled you are as a data scientist. It's more the types of risk you're taking, the work you're doing. And it's not if I had another master's, then I wouldn't have had this issue.
Yeah. And I think also for folks listening, Jacqueline has an excellent talk on some of her own, going through some projects that fail, because part of what we talk about in the book is there are different ways that a project can fail. It can fail at different points, right? All sort of failures are not created equal. And while there is, always some risk, there's also things you can do to make that failure kind of less risky. So the kind of failure you don't want is you went away for 3 months and the team you're working with thought everything was going super well, and they were planning their whole launch around it, and you kind of knew it wasn't going that well, but you don't want to say it to them. And then 3 months in, you're yep, it failed. And they're what the, we had no idea that there was any risk to this. What the heck do you mean? So this doesn't mean that there's nothing, there's a lot of important work you can do around communicating that risk, at checking. And one of those ways is by checking in with people, pretty consistently, so that they know where you're at and they know, what are some possible failures for this project.
Right. And also I would say knowing when to give up, right? If you've worked on a project for 2 months, it's not going anywhere. A lot of data scientists have the natural tendency to if I just changed a couple more parameters for a couple more months, then it'll work. And it's oh my God, no, the signal's not there in the data. Cut your losses and run to something else. I think there's a section in that chapter that is called Cut Your Losses. So yeah, and that talk that Emily referenced that I give, I talk about 5 of the projects I failed with, my biggest failures. And that was grueling emotionally to make a talk to show other people of here's all my 5 biggest failures. I think there's a therapeutic aspect to it of oh, I'm showing this to the world. We can all talk about it. This is just a thing people are not naturally comfortable sharing. And so I think if you have shame or these feelings that are very negative around some of the data science work you've done, then that's that is normal and okay. And this applies to people who are data scientists, but also if you are an aspiring data scientist, if you try downloading a Kaggle set, you can't get things to work, you feel very frustrated, that is also still similar kind of this failure. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with it's not necessarily a great thing to personally blame all of it on yourself. So.
Yeah. And I do think a final note, and this was, so at the end of every chapter, we have an interviewee, so data scientists, managers, data science managers. And one of the things that our Michelle Keem said here, who is our end of chapter interviewee, is also think about companies do have and teams do have different tolerances for this, right? And so you do want to think, there's a great concept by Amy Edmondson of psychological safety, which is found to be really predictive of team success. And it's the idea of, do you feel safe to admit mistakes and admit failures in your team? And so it is worthwhile. And she talks about some ways you can tell when you're interviewing at companies, right? Do they understand that there may be failures sometimes? They understand this is part of learning. Or is it a culture where people are, shamed, or they feel like they can't admit failure? Because you don't want to work at a place like that, especially in data science.
Yes. So with that, Emily, do you want to talk about your last segment?
Yeah. All right. So my last segment is from chapter 5, which is on the search for a data science job. So how do you find the right job for you? And so this is from one of our end of chapter interviewees with, so it's with Jesse Mostapak.
So before you dive, I just want to make fun of you. I was making a lot of fun of Emily before I did this. I'm Emily, normally a book reading is you want to promote the writing you made, not the people you interview statements. but
Yeah,
so I was
but
thinking,
you know what? We did a great job like editing the interviews and like,
yeah,
because we did a whole hour interview. So like I mean, Jesse is also brilliant.
great.
But I do want to say, like, I think this was an important part of the book that we did because we also have like sidebars throughout it because like we knew, we both have a fair amount of experience and we also have, just learned from people we know. But we know like data science is such a broad field. And so it was really important to us to get the perspectives of people like in different roles with different backgrounds and add that to the book. So, make fun of me all you want, but I'm very proud. Okay. So this is our interview with Jessie. So we asked her, what recommendations do you have for starting a job search? She said, think about how attached you are to the data scientist title. If you decide to not concern yourself with what you're called and to instead focus on the work that you're doing, you'll have a lot more flexibility in finding jobs. Some non-data scientist keywords to search for are analysis, analyst, and data. When looking for jobs, focus on what you want to do as a data scientist. For me, I don't get a lot of pleasure from calculating the return on investment from website clicks. I ask myself, what causes do I care about? Which organizations are aligned with that? I cared a lot about the Girl Scouts, and they happened to be looking for an analyst position. So I was able to move in and do that. The same thing happened with Teaching Trust when I wanted to move into education. So I think that's a really good point I wanted to emphasize in this because I do think folks can really get caught up in the data scientist title. And, the fact of the matter is, especially now, so Vicky Boykis, who we have wrote a little blurb for chapter 1, she wrote a blog post on data science is different now. And part of it is for those data scientist titles, especially at kind of well-known companies, they are getting hundreds or, thousands of applications. And it can be, and essentially right now, I think it's very hard to get an entry-level data scientist position. So that's why I sort of wanted to emphasize, though, that there's so many more jobs where you can be doing data science that doesn't necessarily have that title. And if you really, really want that title, you can also, kind of later transition after maybe a data analyst for a while or a data engineer. You could then go into data scientist role. But what do you think, Jacqueline?
I think that's a great point. I think there are a lot of jobs like a financial analyst at a company that maybe isn't a data scientist, but like you are doing very similar work and they would let you use R and they let you blah, blah, right? Like, so it's like, you could mimic a lot of the same stuff and that really broadens the pool of jobs you can apply for. And I would say there's a little bit of like, I had in the beginning of my career, a little bit of, I would say, snootiness about this, which is like, I will not take any job unless I had a master's, undergrad master's in maths. I'm like, I will not take any job unless I'm using, brilliant mathematics to do cutting edge theoretical, blah, blah, blah. And I think that really, really, really narrowed down the pool of jobs I was willing to take. And I think if I had allowed myself to be like, hey, the job of someone who has a title of analyst in the middle of a marketing team actually like does a lot of the same kind of thinking that you do as what we call now a data scientist. They just don't have that title. I think that would have given me a lot more opportunities in life. So I personally could have used this advice 10 years ago, I would say.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to note, like, that what a data scientist means at one company does not equal what a data scientist is at another company, right? So it's not like, oh, like the data scientist title, if you don't have that, like none of the other roles are doing like, machine learning or doing math. So like Lyft has a blog post of how they're data analysts became data scientists, the former data scientists are now research scientists. So it doesn't necessarily tell you like what kind of work you'll be doing because, like I was a data analyst at Etsy when I was working there. And then shortly after I left, they became data scientists. Whereas previously the data scientists had just been the team working on like the ads algorithm model who all had like, masters and PhDs in computer science.
I would say conversely, I when I was a director, I had data scientists working for me, people with the title of data scientist, but we had so little data science work at the moment that like for months they would just build dashboards, which you may not call data science. You'd say that's more of an analyst role. And so like, even if you do get something that has the title of data scientist, that's not a guarantee that because of whatever constraints of the company, you will actually be doing that kind of work.
Yeah. And it's also, I think this is a little bit of a side note, but it's important to recognize like there are very few jobs, like even data scientists, like maybe a few research jobs that are like, all right, I'll just get to be like reading like, papers all the time. And like, I never have to worry about cleaning data. Like that's all done for me. Like I just get to work with like the beautiful models. Like that's like maybe like academia, you could find that. But like a lot of data science jobs will have like, you got to be communicating with people. You got to be like, figuring out like how to get like better data, you know, and maybe, you know, you, Jacqueline, you give a whole talk that like you're not paid to model, right?
Yeah.
Of like, even when you're a data scientist, there's so many more steps before you get to that modeling step, even if that is part of your job.
Yeah, the idea that a data scientist is just constantly building models and neural nets and just so busy with all this theoretical machine learning and reading papers and cutting edge, like that is maybe, yes, like 1% of jobs that 10% of people fight over. So like they're very, very rare and they have their own huge set of problems, but much more jobs are like, okay, I have a real data set here. I got to talk to a million stakeholders about it. I got to put it into a linear regression or another fairly simple model, get some reasonable results, and then figure out how to do this on an ongoing basis, right? And so like it's a lot of communication, it's a lot of stakeholder management, it's a lot of data cleaning. It's not constant research papers, cutting edge. But what if we add the blank parameter from the blank paper? Like it's not really so much like that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like, you know, part of the reason we wrote this book is like, so, you know, this book, we don't have any code in it. There's basically no math, you know, but we wrote this book because there's a lot of books that are on that, right? There are a lot of books on like deep learning or like blog posts or whatever, but like we found much less of like all the rest of this job. Like we have a whole chapter on working with stakeholders, because, you know, this is such an important part of the job, but it's not necessarily something people think about when they're going into data science, but and can lead to disappointment because they're like, wait, I wanted to go into this technical career so I don't have to talk to people. And it's like, data scientist is not that career, right? It's not the career to hide in your cave and just like read these papers and, you know, work out the math. A lot of the job is working with other people.
Yes. Great. I feel like that was a good talking about our favorites.
Awesome, thank you. I probably could listen to you both speak for hours together. This was really awesome. So I'll be moderating the Q&A session for the next 25 minutes. First, I would like to thank you both brilliant authors, Emily and Jacqueline, for the great insights you have provided in the book for aspiring data scientists, right? I mean, based on this survey, we see that there are over 60% of audience who are really interested in this space. So thank you so much. Again, just hearing to you both, it feels like I've picked up a lot of gems, nuggets that are so useful. And I feel like if you don't have a mentor in the data science space, this book will act like a mentor because you're giving real world examples, you're talking about failures, you're talking about different paths. So this is very much what you get from a mentor. So this is an awesome book. Please make sure you check out the bestbook.cool website and use the coupon code. This is awesome. And I also want to thank our audience. Thank you again for taking the survey. This helps us understand where you are in the data science space. And thank you for all the questions. These are amazing. I mean, it's like non-stop questions. So let's get this going. I'll start with a rapid fire round though, just to know you both a little outside the topic. Maybe kind of related. So let me go to my questions. So I'll start with Emily. Again, this is a rapid fire round, so I'll time it and I will make it quick. So I'll start. You ready, Emily?
I'm ready.
Okay. So where are your favorite places to write?
So I actually wrote mostly at home.
Awesome. When are you most inspired?
I usually wrote in the evening after
Great.
dinner.
Good. What's your favorite book?
Oh God. So I was given these questions beforehand. I didn't think about it enough. I really like Misbehaving, which is Richard Thaler's book on the making of behavioral economics.
Misbehaving. Thank you. Who's your favorite author? You can say Jacqueline.
I actually that had not occurred to me. Yes, definitely Jacqueline. One of my favorites from like childhood is Tamora Pierce.
Awesome. What's the best piece of advice you have received?
What's the best piece of advice? You know, that it's I think like that everyone feels imposter syndrome and not to let that hold you back.
Thank you. You made it good. This was really good. You got a lot of questions. We'll start with Jacqueline. Okay. Let's get the timer starting. What's the best thing that happened to you this month?
I got a nice, so like I said, I just moved, and so I have a nice new place I'm living in. I really like it. So yeah.
Good. If you could teach one subject in school, what would it be?
So I have taught integer optimization when I was a professor for a short stint at ASU, and I love that because it was a super, it's not a topic a lot of people talk about, and it was like 11 PhD students I got to teach, and that was really fun.
Awesome, awesome. What's your biggest pet peeve?
Oh my goodness. I was studying Emily's questions before this, so I thought it was gonna be. I really don't like it when people, in meetings, sometimes you deal with people in majority genders instead of minorities kind of talk down to you a little bit. That's a big pet peeve of mine right now.
I'll go with easy questions. Do you have pets?
Yes, I have a cat named Clark. He
Nice.
actually was right under my feet like 2 minutes ago. So
awesome. We finished it. Good job. You both did really good. I was running out of questions, so I was going to make up questions. Good job. So let's jump to the questions that we are getting from audience. Let's get this. So again, there are multiple questions around the same space. Again, as we saw in the survey also that we have 60% trying to see if they can get into the data science space. With that, the question is, I'm not working, would like to make use of my time to update my skills. What are the good resources to learn R?
There's so many. I would say if you haven't used R before, R for Data Science is a great place to start, and it's a book that's free online. But I think a big part here is thinking about, okay, so that's like a good way to get some sort of foundational skills. And then once you have that, there's so many directions you can go in. So I think, one option is thinking about like, well, what do I want to learn about web scraping? Do I want to learn about this? And if you don't know what you want to learn about, think about a problem that you care about. So like a question that you want to answer, and then that will lead you to skills you want to develop.
Yeah, and I would say, just to reiterate that point, whenever I've had a time like I want to learn Kotlin, or like I want to learn this language or this technical thing, it's like I look at it for like 20 minutes and I lose interest. What usually happens that works is like I want to build a website in R. Oh, I'll learn the technical skills that get me to do that. And so having the target be a very concrete project that is like a reasonable thing you can do in like a week makes it 1,000 times easier than trying to be start with the technology and then figure out what project you would use with it.
Very good. Along the same lines, the question, there's another question that came in was, do we need to be proficient at a programming language or Python or even to get into the data science space? Are there any other tools that they could pursue instead?
So I would say that you need to be proficient in R or Python. Either one of those is fine. And there are some other things like knowing SQL is helpful, and there's other things, but like one of those two is you really have to have. And on your like resume, you need to have something that shows you have that, which could either be using it at a job, or it could be, hey, look at this project, as you were saying, this project where I built a web scraper in R, and here's the code on GitHub. Like actually being able to concretely say, not only have I like used this language once in college, but actually here's something concrete I've done with it.
Very good. This question is for Jacqueline, and I love this question because this is on my mind too. How difficult or how easy was your transition from engineering to data science?
So I never was an engineer. I started in math, and then I was like a data scientist before the job was called data science. And then I got a PhD in engineering, but my PhD was really operations research. So it's really focused, it's basically still data science kind of stuff. And then for 8 years, I went and consulted as data scientist like that. But I would say in the last couple of years, I've shifted much closer to a machine learning engineer. So most of the work I'd done for the first 10 years of my career was making analyses that I put into a PowerPoint that I show to a CEO or something. And now I'm actually writing code that gets put into production and then continuously run every second of every day. And that transition, people get really scared of that, I think. Like if you're a data scientist who's mostly been making PowerPoints, it's scary to think, and I have to write code that's continuously running, but like most of the skills are really the same. Like it's not as big of a hurdle as I think most people are fearful that it is.
Got it. Before I jump into this other question that audience are asking, there's one that probably will give some of the answers. So in your experience, what may be some strong traits or strengths for people to be confident and succeed in this space? Either one of you can take the question.
I'm thinking about it. So Emily, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, we've talked about this, definitely communication skills. So that's both, written communication, presentation skills, like kind of knowing when you should be communicating as well. And that's also a big component in interviewing, of course, is, how you answer the questions. Yes, and I think the other ones are kind of talk about in the first chapter, like what are the foundational skills, and you kind of 3 areas like programming, which we discussed, like R, Python, some SQL, math and statistics, and then domain expertise as well. And this is not something necessarily you'll come in with, but for example, when I joined Warby, I never worked in healthcare before, and there's some things I need to learn there, but I had worked with I'd worked at Etsy, so an e-commerce business, and then at DataCamp, which is, only online. And so I did know about like website data and some of the things there, and like cookies and tracking and event logging. So like that's a kind of domain expertise that you build up over time. And that is an important component because it's sort of it gives you a direction to go often when you're starting a data science problem.
Yeah, and I would add to this, right? So there's like the programming, there's statistics, there's knowing your business, whatever, and then there's communication skills. We kind of listed all of those. Every one of those is a skill that you can learn, right? It's not like there's an innate, you do not have the stats innate part of your soul. Like these are all skills you can learn. And I think it's easier. It's easier to see the roadmap. Like, oh, I pick up the textbook in statistics, I learn statistics. Oh, I read that R for data scientists, learn R. But those other skills about like communication and things like that, those are also skills you can train. They just take work to build up, just like you would build up a technical skill. So I think if you don't feel like you're necessarily the strongest communicator right now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're always, going to struggle with that forever. It's just a skill you have to learn.
So is it a triangle, communication, statistics, and programming? Because one of the questions is, if statistics is not the person's strong suite, should they not pursue this career?
It's not like you need to know, these 8,000 types of statistical tests and you need to be expert at it. It's like you just need to be able to reason about like, what does it mean if the median is above the mean, right? Like, what does it mean if this trend is going up, but the line is like, so it's like that kind of statistical comfortness that you get by doing a lot of projects and actually looking at real data. So I don't think it's like, well, if you hated your stats class, you would not be a good data scientist. But I do think if it's like, I hate trying to figure out why the mean's different than the median. If you hate that kind of logical reasoning, then this might not be the best.
Yeah. And some roles are more statistics heavy than others, right? So we talk about like, there's like, we sort of divide, like there's like machine learning, analytics, and decision science. Like decision science is more stat heavy, right? You're often doing like modeling. But like analytics work, sometimes you don't need to use much statistics. So it's like, well, making a dashboard, or I found that like, I've tens of thousands of data points and something is 50% in this country and 10% in this other country, right? You don't need to apply a stat test to know that's different. So there are certainly some jobs that are less statistics heavy than others. So like a research scientist position at Facebook that's trying to, advance their experimentation platform by making a new method for like, powering or whatever, right? Like trying to like eke out this last little bit, that's probably going to be a lot more statistics heavy than a role where you're more dashboarding and like, finding data, or, you're doing some machine learning algorithms.
Awesome. Thank you. I think someone is reading my mind. Literally the same question I had is coming. So in your experience, how do you see both quantitative and qualitative data to drive a decision? And how do you put that story together?
Okay, so this one, let me tell you about my story as a data scientist. I think I keep talking about this. So like I came out of school with a master's in math, and I got my first data science job. But again, I wasn't called data science yet. And I just had this feeling of like, numbers are proof. Data's gonna change the world. We need to stop using these qualitative, like ridiculous business people things. And we need to use real, cold, hard, rational reality data science. And now here I am, like 15 years later in my career, I've consulted with a lot of people, and I'm like, data is fake. It's not data is fake. Data is real, but like, if you see a customers, like, customers who buy sodas are more likely to spend, to spend more money with us for the rest of the month. Okay, that may be a true fact, but does that mean we should try and get everyone else to buy sodas? Does that mean we should market different? Like, all the inferences that people make from that fact are often totally without evidence, but you have to do something in a business. You have to make some decisions. So at some point, you're going to make these leaps of faith. which is to say that data is valuable and data science is very important, but it is so important to also have the qualitative, like to be able to read. Well, the CEO's emotion is like the CEO doesn't want to spend another penny. So how can we come up with a solution that's going to also, really feel comfortable with these, like, frustrations, that like these emotions that these humans are having. And so as, a seasoned person, I really do feel like I put, like, as my career has grown, I put more and more weight on the human qualitative components of this kind of work and less weight on the data tells the one true story, kind of naive ideals I had coming right out of a master's in mathematics.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I go ahead, Emily.
Oh, I was going to say, so, and I went to a really good talk from some Spotify people a couple years ago where they discussed how like qualitative researchers work with data scientists. And the big thing they said is like, well, often the data science, like the quantitative part can get you the what, but the qualitative is needed to get the why, right? We see sales are declining in like Brazil. Okay, well, that's the what, but like why? And you can like try to do some models and stuff, or you could try talking to some people. And also to remember like, so I have a background in the social sciences, specifically organizational behavior, which has some quantitative research, but some qualitative as well, like interviewing people. But also like even the qualitative researchers often use some quantitative methods, right? So they interview a bunch of people and then they like use text analysis. They're trying to find, okay, what are the common themes and like going back there. They're not just sort of like, there is a very rigorous methodology there as well. It's not just like talking to one person and being like, okay, this is why, they have their own they're often called user experience researchers sometimes at companies, and they have a very important role to play as well.
Awesome. And I think that ties very well to the question that they're asking, which I think you both answered already, is how important is it to establish a close relationship with the business stakeholders as a data scientist? And I think that is in line to what you both answered.
We have a whole chapter about that in the book.
Yes.
Like, it is so important that and the stakeholder can be the business people. It can be the engineers who're gonna deploy your code. It could be, there's a lot of people who will be your stakeholders, but like that is so important. And someone, like the better that can do, the better your data science will do. Like it's so much more important that you have a good relationship with your stakeholders than your R squared is an extra 5% higher, right? Like that putting effort in there really makes the difference.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on jobs that do not provide mentorship or training for incoming employees? Any thoughts on that?
I have some thoughts. So Emily and I, we talk about this a fair amount, about the concept of being the first data scientist, right? Mm-hmm. Like the data scientist where there's no mentor or there's no team to guide you. And that job is like for 90% of people, it is a bad fit, the worst, right? Because mentorship is really important, right? Knowing when you're doing something that might not be working well and having someone to talk to about it, like that's so important. There are some people who really like have a huge like thrill from getting to be the person who comes in first and sets the precedent and then leads the other people and mentors. But that's a really rare, like I'd say that's on the rare side compared to people who, especially if you're like thinking about being a data scientist, you're early in career, like that is the worst place to be then, is a place without mentorship to guide you towards like, so you don't spend a lot of time doing things that someone could have been like, oh, that'll never work,
Yeah, and there will be a range of kind of the formality of this. So, I think like, really big companies might have like formal mentor and like sponsorship and other programs. Whereas if you're at a smaller company, it's not like you're like assigned a mentor because a data science team is 7 people. So you just get to know them all and you start working with them and the mentorship sort of happens naturally from there. So I wouldn't necessarily take it as a red flag, like if there's not a formal program, if there are other people you're going to be working closely with and you think you can learn from.
Okay, very good. Another good question. This individual has spent a lot of time, has worked on a couple of projects and also given the links to her project. But again, when she's trying to apply for the jobs, they're looking for a lot of experience. They want people with a certain number of years of experience. This person is wondering if there are any tips that you can give for them to have a breakthrough.
I can start. So I think a couple of things here. One, honestly, right now, the job market is tougher than usual because of COVID, because there's a lot of folks who've been laid off, who are very experienced. So that's sort of just one factor to keep in mind. But the second thing is like, and we have a chapter on this as well, like network, like your network's really important. And why that is because, you know, if you're just applying to, you know, hundreds of jobs, like you might just, especially if they're like bigger companies, like well-known, you know, you're just like one in like many piles, and it's very easy. They just have these rules of thumbs, like experience. It's very easy to discard that, versus if you sort of build up your network, you know, someone there, like people start to know of you, you know, that's a great way to get your foot in the door. But I think the final thing is too, like the excerpt I read is, you know, think about, okay, if they're, you know, really all asking for your experience, is there a data analyst job you can look for? Is there something else where, like, you know, you're starting to use data, you're getting, you know, analysis, especially if you're coming right out of school, like just honestly, that first year of experience, like at work experience, almost anywhere you go, it's going to be really valuable and you're going to learn a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say that last point of just, yes, use the jobs that are adjacent to data science as the gateway. Get a couple of years of those on your, polish your resume so those look as close to data science as they possibly can. And then look, now you're someone with years of experience as data science.
Great. Another quick question around the same lines is, any suggestions for getting an unpaid internship? They have the background of Python, SQL, Tableau. Any unpaid internships, any suggestions?
So I would say in this field, there are almost no unpaid internships. There are lots of paid internships, but data science is just a field where for whatever reason, people are aware that unpaid internships are immoral and people don't do them so much. That said, I think this is literally, if you're a company that's hit by COVID, which is like every company, one of the easiest places to cut is the internship program. So I would say maybe this summer is not going to be the best summer. I guess we're already late, but even, you know, the next year or two is going to be tough for internships. But on a resume, a cool project you did over the summer where you built a website in R that did blah, 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 like that kind of thing you do on your side can look like, you know, that can look like a good substitute for having an internship, especially because no one's going to have internships over the next couple of summers. So it's going to be a common problem.
So another one, maybe related to this job market and related to where we are building that network, is what is really important. Aside from WIA, what other professional career groups or resources do you recommend for those seeking to cultivate deeper soft skills or network, and also kind of build that confidence in negotiating an offer? Again, you talked a lot about in your book, leaving gracefully, moving up the ladder, all of that stuff. Any recommendations?
I will look at you, see if you're going to talk first. I could say something. No. I think, okay, so for me and Emily are both big on Twitter. There's a lot of good Twitter data scientists, a great place, especially during the viruses, Twitter is a great place for these sorts of conversations. And then I would say, not in virus times, meetups and conferences, and like that whole circuit I found have been enormously helpful for getting that kind of community going a little bit. And especially in not virus times, meetups are really low stakes. You can go, you can miss 3. It's not a big deal. It's not like you have to get company permission like you would with like a conference or something. So I think like those sorts of small, especially, yeah, like, you know, R ladies, you know, Pi ladies, like a lot of these small meetup-y groups can be just enormously useful for that.
Awesome. There's another question. I think this applies to any field, but this is something that you've talked a little bit in your book also. Can you share a personal example of how you had to plan or prepare for the conversation around negotiating your salary?
Do you want to take it, Emily?
Yeah, I can take it. I think for like the planning and preparing, I think a big point that we talk about is, if at all possible, avoid giving your like salary expectations or your current salary. Fortunately, giving some cities outlaw like companies asking you about your current salary, but they can still ask like, what do you expect to get? And I think why we say you want to avoid that is because sometimes you can be very pleasantly surprised, because, you know, you might have said, oh, I'm expecting X. And then, but you don't, you know, you say like, in your head, you're thinking, okay, I expect around X, but I'm not going to say that. And they come back and you're like, all right, we're offering you X plus $20,000. But I think in terms of preparing, you know, part of it is recognizing, keeping that first conversation where they give you the salary offer like kind of as short as possible, because sometimes like it's hard to prepare for what exactly that's going to be, because data, like they can offer so much range. And so keeping that like, you know, kind of short and be like, well, thank you so much. Like, you know, excited about this. I need to think about whatever. I need to talk to my goldfish. And then giving yourself time after hearing it, getting those details to think about it, to talk with other people in your network, to prepare. because it's hard to know before the salary number, like what kind of thing you're going to have to go in and how you should approach it.
So I agree with that. And I would add to that, just also in advance, you should have an idea of what you think you're worth. And like really make sure you get that right. Like, go look at what other people are making, ask around, go to Glassdoor, because especially for women, it's very easy to undervalue what you think you're actually worth. And like, it's very easy to be like, well, this feels like they're offering me a lot. That should be plenty. I don't need more than that. And like, you're actually still underselling yourself. And you know who don't worry about that? Men. Men are every day asking for more than they're really worth. And they just are very good at it. And so you got to fight back a little and do it too.
Yeah, and we do have a whole chapter 8 is all about like, your offer and like negotiating and stuff. So I think this is something really, really important because even like a 5% difference can add up over time.
It does. It does. Thank you. I have one last question and then we'll close this. With the emergence of AI and ML, how do you see the career landscaping change? What new roles do you see emerging as a result of it?
Oh,
I don't think it's going to change at all. I really don't. I think AI I think it's a buzzword that's already kind of fading a little bit. And really, when we're talking about ML, like we're just talking about the same things we've been doing before, except swap a linear regression with a neural network, which is the same, like it's still modeling, data cleaning, what kinds of problems you can apply this stuff to. All of that's still going to be very similar for almost every company. And I think you can see that because I mean, AI and like these things came out started really becoming big buzzwords years ago. And so far, it really hasn't been very much change. And you never know because things don't change and then they suddenly really change. But like, I don't think in the next 5 years, at least, there should be any meaningful difference from what we are now.
Yeah. I'm sending out a link to a talk that I really like from Eduardo de la Rubia at our studio this year, which is like data science, like value beyond models in production. And I do think one good point he has there is that often like people think of data science, they might think of machine learning, but part of his point is like he's anticipating that it's going to become more, the ML part is going to become more engineering organization. And engineers, like people sort of like classically trained in software engineering, will often have an advantage over data scientists in that space. And so, it's not saying like don't go into machine learning, but just something else to think about of how I do think a lot more software engineers are becoming interested in machine learning, especially as we have like auto ML stuff. Although Jacqueline like has actually done machine learning production, is looking at me like, I don't know.
No, I think this is broadly right. I think the lines between software and data science and machine learning, they're going to continue to blur. I think they're going to blur at a slow pace like they've been blurring so far. And I do think, maybe in 5 years, we consider machine learning just like 100% separate from data science, whereas now we think they're still somewhat connected. But yes, I would say it's like a slow, gradual change in this space. And I agree with the concept of like, yes, we're all going to kind of merge, it's going to get a little messy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're almost close to the top of the hour. Thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. This was very, very valuable for me, and hopefully it was for all the audience based on the questions. It is definitely a very interactive session. I'll let Regan do the closing and call out some reminders.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks again to both of you for prepping for this and just, reading some of the pieces of the book. I think, again, we've posted multiple times the link and the discount code, but if you are serious about wanting to advance your career in data science or get into the data science field, this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. So, make sure to get the book and read more and continue engaging in these communities as well. Real quick before we conclude, just a couple of reminders. So the first is a speed mentoring event that's coming up with Witty. That's on July 23rd, and this is virtual, so you can attend from anywhere. And that'll be from 11 to 1 Eastern time. And then second, our next event is going to be in 2 weeks from today. And so if you are interested in attending that, there is more to tech than coding. We have a conversation with Kira, who is the founder of Girls Plus Data, and that's going to be moderated by Lauren. So thank you so much again to everyone for attending and sticking with us for the last hour. Wonderful questions, and we will be posting this recording on our YouTube channel for Women in Analytics and on our website, as well as sending out a follow-up email with the link. So thanks again for attending, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.